Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this MDA Engage community webinar on college and careers. With more and more members of the neuromuscular disease community attending college and entering the workforce, it is important to have an idea of what questions to ask and what to think about when looking at a career. My name is Michelle Barrios, and I am the Community Education Specialist at MDA. We are thrilled to have you join us today for this important and educational webinar. The webinar today is part of our larger MDA Engage flagship community event series, which focuses on bringing the neuromuscular disease community together around education and social opportunities. Be sure to visit the MDA Engage section on mda.org for updates on upcoming virtual education events. We are recording today's event and will be posting it to the mda.org website for on-demand viewing to ensure that those who were not able to join us live today are able to access this information. Please know that all phone lines have been muted. We will be having a question and answer session towards the end of the webinar. Please be sure to utilize the Q&A window to type in your questions. If you hover over the bottom of your screen, a tray of webinar icons will appear. Click on the Q&A bubble to open the window and enter your question. You do not need to wait until the Q&A session to chat in your questions. As questions come up along the webinar, please feel free to send those in. Before we begin, I would like to say thank you to our speaker and panelists whom you will meet shortly. I would also like to thank our event supporter, the New Motion Foundation. We would not be able to provide events like this if not for their generous support, so thank you very much. Let's review the objectives for today's webinar. Attendees will examine the differences between high school and college, learn how to prepare for college, discuss career options, and explain adaptations available to do your job. Next, I would like to introduce our speaker. Kayla Brown is part of the Do It organization at the University of Washington in Seattle. The Do It, which stands for Disabilities, Opportunities, Internet Working, and Technology, is dedicated to empowering people with disabilities through technology and education. It promotes awareness and accessibility in both the classroom and the workplace to maximize the potential of individuals with disabilities and make our communities more vibrant, diverse, and inclusive. Do It hosts programs and projects for pre-college and college students with disabilities and for advocates, educators, administrators, and employers. And with that, I would like to turn over the webinar to Kayla.
Hello, just one.
There you go, you're in.
Awesome. Okay, so hi everyone. My name is Kayla Brown, and I'm really excited to be here today to talk a little bit about college and career options for people with disabilities. We're going to talk about a range of things today, but feel free to put questions in the Q&A as we go along, and I will be sure to check that after, and the other panelists for Q&A can also give their input. Okay. So I just want to, I was going to introduce myself a little bit more thoroughly. So I'm personally very excited to be here doing a webinar with MDA because I grew up receiving services from MDA, going to summer camp. So I included a picture. I was trying to find pictures of me at camp, and that was one that I found. And so, yeah, I grew up going to summer camp. I was a Goodwill ambassador for, a few years. I helped at Fill the Boots. So I'm really excited to kind of bridge my professional life with my personal being here today. So I put my favorite food is avocado because that's very important for you all to know, obviously. My dog is very important to me as well. His name is Oliver. I have a graduate degree from the School of Social Work at the University of Washington, and I'm currently a doctorate student at Seattle University studying educational leadership. So a little bit more about Do It. We are based at the University of Washington, but we have programs that span all over the country and all over the world. So our primary objectives are to increase the success of people with disabilities in challenging academic programs and careers, to promote the application of universal design to physical spaces, IT, instruction, and also services. We have a lot of online content and publications and videos for use. Anyone can use them for presentations or exhibits or in the classroom. So we have all of those available on our website, which I'll give you the URL at the end. And then we also provide a lot of resources for students with disabilities and educators. And librarians, employers, parents. We really try to reach a broad spectrum of stakeholders in order to pass along information and content like I will be presenting in this webinar. So how we do it, just a cheesy way of saying we have kind of two approaches. So one, we work directly with college students and K through 12 students one-on-one through some of our programs. And then we also do some more structural advocacy with training faculty and staff. We work with researchers. So we're doing more structural work. And that is aimed at promoting your universal design, undoing ableism, promoting participatory research and design, but most importantly, it's listening to the voices of people with disabilities because they are the experts at a lot of the things that we are aiming to do. So the number one thing I want everyone to know who's watching this is that college is very much an achievable goal for all people. And I think a lot of people with disabilities don't have the same preparation for college that non-disabled students do. So sometimes it might seem like something that's impossible for you to do, and because we have all of these other extra things to consider when we are looking at colleges and also careers. So 11% of undergraduates, and this statistic's hard to quantify, but a significant portion of undergraduates in college report having a disability. And it's significant even accounting for the fact that not everybody actually discloses that they have a disability. But the point is, a lot of people have disabilities who are in college, and it's just about finding the right resources to get you there. So we'll be talking about the differences between high school and college first, because there are some very important things that we need to take into account when we're thinking about that really important transition. It's very, very different in college, so we'll go over some of those things. So in the K through 12 system, you've got things like special education and IEPs, individualized education plans, and 504 accommodations. So that is kind of the landscape that people in the K through 12 system are working with. And so we'll go more into what that is. But when you go to college, you're looking at a few things. So the school will provide accommodations. and they will require documentation for that, which we'll talk about more. And one big difference for college is that students must meet all class requirements. So what this means is whatever is on the syllabus, all students have to do. But the school will provide the tools appropriate to help that student meet those requirements. And so we'll talk more about that as well. So disability documentation, I usually start with this because it's fairly important. Documentation can be quite a barrier to people with disabilities in getting services. So when you go to college, we'll talk about logistics as well. You are going to need some documentation that's quite important. And essentially, it's just showing the school that you have a medical condition that's going to make it necessary that you get accommodations. And so a lot of times schools will say they need to be done by a qualified professional, right? So that's really just saying, based on the nature of what the disability is, you're going to go and seek documentation from either maybe it's your primary care provider, maybe it's a counselor or a therapist or a psychiatrist, so those are kind of the qualified professionals that are considered to be appropriate to help you with documentation. And the thing about this is that when you go to college, you don't have to identify as having a disability. So you could go to college and never go to seek out accommodations. That's entirely your choice. And so accommodations, it's going to look very different in college. So students have to request and manage their own accommodations. In high school, this is a system that's very much managed for students. And so there's a shift in how you access the accommodations you need to complete your classes. So that's a very important, because oftentimes students will go to college and they'll think, well, why hasn't anyone reached out to me? Why hasn't anybody given me the paperwork or, set up an IEP team for me? Well, it's a little bit different. And so one thing that I tell people is that you can absolutely practice requesting accommodations in high school, and you should. Whether you have an IEP or a 504, those are great opportunities to practice. So in college, I wanted to give a few examples of what accommodations could look like. Again, these are going to be similar but different from a K-12 setting. So a lot of them are standard, accessible furniture in classrooms is very common, especially for people with muscular dystrophy, like myself. I use an adjustable height desk. I have to actually make sure that I can get into the room itself. And so an example of accessibility getting in the way of your class and needing an accommodation is sometimes they'll have to actually move the entire classroom, the class into a different classroom. Not the actual classroom itself, but so that's pretty common, relocating classes to a more accessible location, and accessible instructional materials. So these could be audio files, electronic files, large print or braille. Testing services is probably going to be similar to high school as well. So sometimes an accommodation may be that you need extended time on tests. So that is often given as an accommodation in college as well. And each college is different, but many of them have testing centers. So you can actually get a quiet place if you need a quiet place. If you get extended time on tests, it's very common for you to be in a separate room in a controlled environment where you're not distracted by any other classmates who are taking the same test. Like I said, that could look a little bit different depending on where you go. So some other examples, you might get a shuttle service on campus to get you from class to class. I'm from the University of Washington, so we're quite large, and so there are shuttle services available. Note-taking services, also very common accommodations. So you work with your disability services office, and each school has probably a different process, but you're essentially trying to find someone to take notes for you in class. It's probably going to be another classmate, and those notes are shared with you. Okay. Yeah, so just to reiterate, in high school, you've got your special education services, you've got, your IEP or your 504, and in college there is no special education, no IEPs, and no IEP teachers as well, and no 504s. So, and like I said, everyone has to meet the same course requirements. So in high school, you're getting a lot of structure, right? You're getting everything planned out for you and organized. High school schedule classes one after another throughout the day, so you don't have a lot of free time during the day. And college classes are a little bit different, so they're going to be scattered throughout the day and the evening. They can be on the weekends. And so you have a lot of free time, a lot of downtime when you're a college student and you don't have work to go to if you have a job. So you meet with an advisor sometimes, especially when you're first starting out at a new college. There are advisors that are there to help you, but it is your responsibility to figure out how to register and when to register for the right classes. So although there are advisors, they don't really do things for you. What they can do is answer any questions you have. And so oftentimes you have to know what questions to ask before you go and see them. So that can be a little bit tricky because how do you know what questions to ask, right? If you've never been in college before. So that just takes a little bit of preparation, which we'll talk about. And so you'll want to check out, what your requirements are for the potential major you might be doing, or a minor or a certificate, whatever it is. You just want to make sure you're very organized and keep track of the requirements and which classes you should sign up for. So everyone will be taking different classes. So in high school, your progress is monitored. Your parents and your teachers have access to your grades. But in college, nothing can be released without your consent. So you're not going to get progress reports, and your parents aren't going to be able to see how things are going for you unless you give written permission, which you can do. But that is something that you have to actively give permission for. So no one's going to really be keeping tabs on you in that regard. So it's a lot more independent. And that can be tricky for people. So in college, you're going to have a lot more homework than you are being in class. So that is also oftentimes a big difference for people who are used to a lot of class in high school and then maybe a little bit of homework. I know a little bit might be stretching it, but usually you're going to have less homework in high school than you will in college. And that's because you're going to get, maybe you have a 50-minute class 2 or 3 days a week for one class. The rest is really up to you to get to teach yourself. So you're doing a lot of teaching yourself. And so when you go to class, typically you're going to jump right in to either discussions, or there might be additional lectures. It really depends on which school you go to. University of Washington, the intro level classes are very lecture heavy. So instructors expect you to schedule your out-of-class readings and papers and assignments throughout the quarter. So you're going to be expected to make your schedule and when you work on things. So in high school, you have a lot of staff around to support you. And it's not that in college you're not getting support, but it's a little bit different. You have to seek out support. So in college, staff have to provide access, right? And disability support services will provide accommodations. But your success is really up to you. It's very, very self-driven. And so, of course, along with that, you want to make sure that you have a good support system. Because a good example of a support system would be, maybe it's your IEP team. How can you replicate that in college? How can you get a team of people who are invested in what you're doing around you? And I'll talk about some ways you can do that here in a few minutes. And like I talked about before, in college, there's very strict codes of confidentiality, like I mentioned with the parental release of information. So in addition to that, the Disability Services Office can only tell an instructor what accommodations you are eligible for, but they won't release or reveal your disability to them. So that's entirely up to you to talk to your instructors about. So oftentimes, people won't even mention it to their instructor, but their instructor will have received some sort of notification of what accommodations you're receiving. So, but that's all they get. They're not getting any detailed medical information about you. So what can you do to prepare? There are a lot of things that you can do, and it's best that you start sooner than later. I wish that I had learned to articulate my needs a little bit better when I was earlier in high school, but it's never too late. So learn how to explain your disability so that others will understand your needs and your strengths. And you want to be able to explain it pretty succinctly, because people who are providing you accommodations in college, they need you to be really specific and have your needs well documented so that they can actually help you figure out what accommodations you could qualify for. Because there are a lot of things that you might not know that you could qualify for. So it's best to be very specific about how you work the best. So you can practice explaining your disability in your IEPs or 504 plans, and especially your transition plan. I've sat in on meetings, IEP meetings or 504 meetings, and watch students lead their own meeting, and it's very, very empowering, and it's a good opportunity to practice. So if that is something you feel comfortable doing, give it a try. Try to lead the process and lead the conversation. Start advocating for yourself and asking things for yourself in your transition plan. So I have a hard time asking for things. So this was really hard for me to do at first. Like I said, you might not know something could be adjusted for you in your class without asking. The important thing to know is that not every accommodation you're going to ask for in college, you're not going to get them all. There are a lot of things that you got in high school that you won't qualify for in college. Primarily things like altering assignments. I had a hard time handwriting things, so or typing because my hands are weak. In high school, I was able to reduce page numbers of essays and things like that. In college, that's not typically something that you would be given, but you can mention that that was an accommodation you got. Always mention what you have received, because you never know what your counselor at the Disability Resources Office can do for you. You will have somebody who's a point person to your accommodations. So when you get that process rolling, they'll assign you somebody. I've already talked a little bit about practicing, but practicing talking about your accommodations kind of goes hand in hand with explaining your disability. And right now, you can start today, review the websites for the colleges you're interested in. Look at their disability resources offices. Every college is going to have resources for students with disabilities. And this is typically the office that's going to be helping you coordinate your accommodations, and they can connect you with other resources on campus as well. Start the process to request accommodations for college entry exams. This could be the SAT or the ACT. It could also be the Compass test and any of the two-year school tests that you might have to take to go to a community college. It's a long process to get accommodations. So that's kind of like a practice run of getting accommodations for college. You have to submit documentation. It's going to be a little less intensive than requesting college accommodations, but the SAT and the ACT are often required for you to go to four-year universities. Some don't need them, but many of them do. So that's going to be something you're going to have to look into. And it's never too late to do a little bit of research on that and figure out what's going to be best for you. Visit college campuses and see what resources for students with disabilities there are. You can talk to students. The University of Washington has a lot of unique offices and programs for people with disabilities. One of them is a office or they're a center. They're called the D Center. And the D stands for disability and also capital D deaf students. So this is a center for people with disabilities to come and connect and really build relationships with each other. And it's a great example of one of the things that a college campus could potentially offer. And so I definitely encourage you to do a little bit of research on the websites of different colleges. You can contact DVR, the Department of Vocational Rehabilitation. I always encourage people to at least check it out. They can help you with a lot of different things. The ultimate goal for them, and we can talk more about this in the Q&A, because I think there are some people on there that might have more experience with this, but DVR is really to help you reach your career goals. And so oftentimes your career goals are very interconnected with your school goals. So there may be things that and services they can offer you to help you while you're in school. Some of those could be help paying you for books. They can help you with getting some assistive technology. They do job coaching and resume reviews. So there are a lot of things that they can help with. So I highly encourage you to check out DVR as well. And I've talked about documentation already, but it's really important to figure out what documentation you have before graduating high school. That's really the prime time to get your documentation figured out. Make sure it's updated. And that's because colleges want recent documentation, as recent as possible, typically within the last 3 years. So that's why it's really important to keep an eye on that while you're still in college, or high school, sorry. And so now you're in college. What do you do now? Here are some kind of tips to help you maximize your success in this area, because the transition is hard, but then once you get there, it can be quite shocking. So you want to develop strategies and study skills and a network of support, like I mentioned earlier. And this network can involve a lot of different people. I always try and look at the value of my relationships around me. They're very important. So whether it's friends or classmates, I try to stay in touch with people because having a network of people you can go to when you need help with something is really important. This could also be counselors at school, advisors at school. Of course, if you get services at the Disability Resources Office, they will be part of your support network as well, and have a wealth of knowledge. And clubs on campus, these are all really great ways to build up your network of support. And that's a really, really important thing to do. You want to attend class. That's important. I will say that I use a wheelchair and I have caregivers, and I live in Seattle, so weather can sometimes be a barrier to getting to class. So sometimes attending class can be difficult. And that is an experience that many college students have, and I'm sure more of us will talk about in the Q&A as well. But you, when possible, attend class. If it's a disability-related struggle, there's really nothing we can do about that because our lives are so up and down. But in terms of just a student, try to resist the urge to sleep in. It's tempting sometimes because sometimes you're in very large classes and you might not be noticed if you're not there. Although if you're in a wheelchair, it sometimes is obvious when you're not there. So that doesn't always work. But arrive on time if you can. Again, elevator breakdowns will happen. Caregivers showing up late will happen. That's just a reality of our lives, but try to arrive on time. It's always awkward when you go in late and you need extra, time to sit down and get all situated. So you don't want to be that awkward person if you can avoid it. Try to participate as much as you can, obviously, in discussions and activities, because you really want to impress your teachers. And you want to impress them for many reasons. It's not really sucking up to them, but you want them on your side. If you really like an instructor that you have, they can potentially be part of your network of support. These are people who can stick with you even after the class ends. My college is on a quarter system, so we have 10 weeks with an instructor. But I still have teachers from 10 years ago that I talk to. Some of them wrote me letters of recommendation for jobs or for grad school. So that's also really important. So talk to them, get to know them. Teachers love it when you ask questions. And there are these things called office hours in college, and oftentimes instructors will put their office hours on the syllabus and say, hey, this is a time for people to come and ask me questions and talk about how you're doing in class, or if you have a question about an assignment, that's the time to do it. And I've heard from many instructors that they appreciate it when students come and talk to them. And that's really a good bonding opportunity. Make sure you do all your work and check it, turn it in neat and clear. That's kind of a given. You want to make sure that you're monitoring your your progress yourself. So just keep an eye on the grades you're getting. And if you begin to fall behind, this is really important that you ask for help. I have had such supportive instructors and professors that really cared genuinely about how I was doing and my well-being. But it's often that they don't really have the time to reach out to each student individually. So if you reach out to them, that's going to be very, very helpful for you in many contexts. Not every professor is perfect, but many of them genuinely care about you, even though they don't get to build that relationship as deeply as you would if you had them all year round. So yeah, make sure you monitor your progress and work with your professor as needed. Stay in contact with your disability support office. So this could be called Disability Resources for Students. It could be called Disability Services. There are a lot of different names to how they're described, but every college will have one. Yeah, stay in contact with your professors, like I mentioned before. So Do-It has a lot of resources and programs that are available to people who are either, maybe they're still in high school, or maybe they're in college already. Maybe they're about to transition into the workforce. So we've got a lot of different things that we do. And some of them are focused on helping students with disabilities who have an interest in computing or engineering. So there are a lot of different specific things we do. There are also some more general programs that can offer more general resources for how to get into college or enter into a career. And we also have, I put 2 examples up here of our publications that really walk you through in detail some of these steps. And I apologize if you hear noise in the background with me. I think someone might be mowing their lawn or something, so I apologize. And so yeah, these are 2 examples of some great resources we have. We also have videos, and you can download any of these things or ask for copies. And so I would just really encourage you to check out our website because we have a lot on there, and you can always contact us. So I guess now isn't really the official Q&A. So we will wait on that. Oh, thank you. So
That was me. Thanks, Kayla.
Over. Yeah.
Yes, so let's go over to the Q&A. Before we start, I wanted to introduce our 3 panelists for today. We have Greg, Kevin, and Angela, and they've taken their time today to join this webinar, talk a little bit about themselves and what they do, and answer any questions. Greg, hi, can you introduce yourself and let the audience know a little bit about you?
Yes, I'm Greg Willett, and I do work for in our state of Kentucky, where I'm calling in from here. I work for the Office of Vocational Rehabilitation. So it's called Department, Office, Bureau, depends on the state. And I have done so for over 25 years. And you know, we work with a lot of individuals that are going to school, they're transitioning to work, all those sorts of things. So I hope to share a little bit of that with you all today.
Thank you, Greg. Angela, would you like to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what you do?
Yes, hi everyone. I'm Angela Macaron. I am a PhD student at Seattle Pacific University studying clinical psychology. I have been an ambassador for MDA here in Washington previously, and I really enjoy doing these types of things and interacting with others with neuromuscular disorders. I have selenoprotein type congenital muscular dystrophy. And then I hope to take my own experiences with muscular dystrophy and apply them to my academic and professional life. I hope to specialize in rehabilitation psychology, so working with people with various chronic illnesses and disabilities within a mental health context. So thanks for having me here.
Thanks, Angela. And last but not least, Kevin, can you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what you do?
Sure. My name is Kevin Schaeffer. I'm from Cary, North Carolina, and I work for BioNews, which is a media company that focuses on rare diseases. So we own sites like MD News Today, SMA News Today, many others. In college, I went to NC State University and studied English, and I have spinal muscular atrophy type 2. And yeah, in my work, I started out just as a columnist for the SMA site, which I still write, but worked my way up into like multimedia and management. And so I oversee our forums division where we build online forums for rare disease communities. So I'm grateful to be a part of it, and thank you for the support here. So happy to be here.
Thank you, Kevin. Like I previously mentioned in the beginning of the webinar, if you hover over the bottom of your screen, you'll see a Q&A bubble. Click on the bubble and type in your questions. I think I saw something coming in the
Michelle, sorry to interrupt, but
yeah.
I failed to mention, I have Becker muscular dystrophy, and so am dealing with that a little bit more these last 3 years, but anyway, we're still going.
Thanks, Greg. Let's see. Comment came in. I don't think it's a question, it's just a comment. So maybe if you have any replies to this comment. I think it was responding to something Kayla may have mentioned about having trouble asking for help. He says, I wasn't really ready for campus city life on my own. I didn't know what I needed, a transition in between periods or environment from suburban high school. I ended up having to leave school and return home. I haven't been to school in a while. Hopefully I will be able to find the right program and place for me and try again after some time. So do you have any comments or suggestions for him on how to find maybe the right school or the right program?
I can jump in on this one. I like what Kayla was talking about. I really like the aspect of asking for help, and I realize it's not easy for everyone, but that's one of the things you just kind of have to do in college. Because I know for me, I had an aide with me all throughout school growing up, and then that's not something you have in college. I was fortunate to able to have note takers with me. They were provided by my university's disability services office. So that's a big thing, is when you're looking at colleges, look for a good disability services program. I mean, all universities pretty much have some, but they're, some are going to have better than others. And so that's something really important to look at. But I mean, other than note takers in class, I was kind of on my own getting around campus and that kind of thing. And for me, my arm strength started to deteriorate heavily in high school and then in college. And so I had to, ask people to not only help with, opening doors and that kind of thing, but also I would have to have a friend with me at lunch every day to help me out because I couldn't eat independently. And I just got used to that. I mean, that's how I met so many people. A lot of friends joke that I knew everyone on campus, but a lot of that came from, I would, ask someone random for help with something, then, spark a conversation, and I realize, I am very extroverted, and so makes it a little bit easier. But even as an extrovert, it's still, I understand the anxiety that comes with asking for help, and it's just something you have to deal with. And I think the more you practice, the better you'll get at it, because whether you're at a big university or something small, you're going to need help. You're not going to have someone with you all day unless you have some kind of accommodation there. So it's just one of those things you have to do. But you know, what eased my anxiety a lot though is that everyone on a college campus is really nice and supportive. And I mean, I never really had any trouble getting the help I needed. So if you can just kind of get over that initial anxiety and ask for help when you need it, it'll benefit you a long way, whether it's in, you know, getting around campus or in classes, any of that.
Thanks, Kevin. Another question came in the chat. Did anybody live in the dorms as a freshman or during their time in college? Angela, do you want to share your experience with living in dorms?
Yeah, so I did live in the dorms as a freshman and sophomore, and then lived in an on-campus apartment my junior and senior year with some friends. And so I think, you know, your question was living in the dorms difficult as a freshman. I think it's really going to depend on the person and what your particular needs are. So just I can explain kind of what my needs were and how that worked for me. So I use a mobility scooter to get around, but I am able to transfer independently. And as long as I have my scooter, and like there's like automatic door openers to like open heavy doors, I'm fairly independent. There might be like some minor tasks that I need help with, like reaching something, you know, out of my reach, or picking something heavy up. But like Kevin was saying, like that's where the piece of like learning to ask your peers for help for random things really came into play for me. But as far as like accommodations in the dorm, I lived on the first floor, so I didn't have to deal with access issues. And I wanted to be on the first floor because if the elevator in the building didn't work, I wanted to be able to get to my room or leave my room to go to class. So that was really big for me. My freshman year, I lived in a suite. So it was like 2 bedrooms, so like 4 girls total. And like we shared like a teeny tiny little common area, and then a bathroom. And so this was really beneficial for me because I had we had our own bathroom that we just had. We didn't have to have like the traditional like common bathrooms where you have to like take all your stuff and trek down the hall to take a shower, and you don't really have that privacy. And so that was really helpful. And they did put me in a ADA accessible suite, which I didn't necessarily need, but it gave us a lot more extra room. So I was able to park my scooter like there and not have it be in the way of my roommates. And so that, and our bathroom was like a lot bigger, which was really nice. And so it was an accessible shower, and it had like a pull down chair and everything. And so if that's something that you would need, they have those options. Again, it's going to depend on your need and the school that you go to. Yeah, and then we had a kitchen in like the dorm, not like our room, but on the first floor of the dorm. So like if you wanted to access a stove or refrigerator, if you have medications or foods that you need. But then we also had our own mini fridge and microwave in our suite. So it was like right there, easy access. And then I actually didn't have a roommate in my room, so I had my own room. So it was actually just 3 girls, including me. I use a BiPAP machine at night to help me breathe. And so I didn't want that to like keep anyone else awake in the night. And so they just let me have my own single room. But yeah, just make sure you are able to ask questions with the disability office and get those accommodations earlier rather than later, so you can get what you need. And also you can ask those questions when you're looking at schools too, to see if they have dorms that would suit your needs.
Yeah, for sure. I have a question for Greg. It says, I know vocational rehab can offer services to support someone who is pursuing higher education. Can Greg share a bit about what those services are?
Okay. Again, I always preface this by these, it's state to state, you know, most of us, you know, I know in Kentucky, we're 21% state funded, 79% federally funded. So a lot of this is the same state to state to state. But the primary thing, you know, that I would say is that, you know, number one, we're going to do some sort of assessment about, you know, what the appropriate goal will be, you know, and does that involve school? And if it involves school, what degree path? So that's the first thing. And then it depends on the person. But, you know, the second thing, we in this state, we can help a little bit with tuition. When I started with the agency 25 years ago, we paid all the tuition. But times have changed, funding has changed, so we cannot do that, you know, in our state anymore. And some states don't even do tuition at all. And they only do books and supplies and those sorts of things. So that's a service that we can do. And then, you know, assistive technology obviously is huge. We help folks with those types of things that can help you do the, you know, either go to school. Well, I think I wrote it down here. Assist with training, obtaining, and maintaining employment. So any of those things, really, we do assistive technology with students. We do it with, you know, folks that are employed. So that's certainly a big thing. And, you know, as part of one of the things I think one of y'all said that kind of made me jot this down, but vehicle modification, you know, whether you're a driver or a rider in a vehicle, you know, vehicles need to be accommodate your specific issues. Some states aren't as good as others. We have our state is very good at adapting those types of things. As I just found out, I have my first accessible vehicle in my driveway now. And it took, you know, it takes a little while for those things to happen, 4 or 5 months of trying to make sure we got it right. So, you know, those things are very helpful. There are, you know, I think Kayla mentioned attendant care. You know, in our state, we help provide some attendant care, but that would be not like going to class and those things. It'd be preparing for class or the end of day, you know, so beginning of day activities, getting up, moving around. So in our state, we can do that. We don't do it that often. A lot of, you know, it isn't as much as you would think, but we can do that. But we do, you know, we defer to the schools. The schools have the means and those abilities, you know, like Kayla said, use the disability resource room, you know, the disability resource centers, I'm sorry. And then, you know, one thing I want to reiterate, no matter what, you know, advocate, advocate, advocate. Nobody else is going to do it better than you, for you. You know, it is hard at first. You know, I can tell you, I spent, you know, really about 40 plus years of not really utilizing any help. You know, I got around, I didn't move very fast, and I didn't do things as good as anybody else, but I did them. So I've had to adapt in the last 10, 12 years, throw my pride out the window and say, I need help. I can't do that. Please help me, you know. So, you know, certainly advocate for yourself. So anyway, I hope I answered that. If you need, you know, let me know. I can always get more detail.
Yeah, I'll look into questions if people have any more, would like any more details on that.
Can
Kayla,
I add on to that?
yeah, of course.
Yeah, because
absolutely.
I appreciate, Greg, you bringing up the aids and kind of caregiving side of this. And we also had a comment in the chat that I think I think that aids and caregiving is a huge barrier for people with, physical disabilities, people who need caregiving. And so that's a really important thing to bring up, because while things are going to vary state to state, and it's so cool that DVR, I had no idea about some states could potentially offer that as a service. But most of the time, you're going to be coordinating caregiving using your own resources. Caregiving and aids, like aids in school, are not typically an accommodation that a school will provide. So that's going to be a challenge for a lot of people, and it is a challenge. So that's where the asking for help comes in, and learning how to ask. And it's super hard. But every single day I ask the same classmate to help me get out my laptop. And we became friends. And so, yeah, you're not going to get an aid as an accommodation. There could be some schools that have programs that do that. So it's not 100% no, it's not. But that's where this research aspect comes into play. But having aid services is definitely not something that is typically something that a college would offer. For me, I use a caregiver at home to help me, but I don't have an aid with me at school. I kind of just adapted what I had. I got a really light laptop. I hold it in my lap until I get to class. And, you just make all these like little alterations in your life to get what you need done. But it's hard, and it's certainly a barrier. But I find talking to other people with disabilities about what they do is the most helpful in that context.
Yeah, and Kayla, I just wanted to add, a lot of states have independent living centers that help out with attendant care, and those at least are a resource to direct you towards independent, because it's hard to, not only find any care attendants, but but a lot of times you have to be the one that pays them and does all those things and hires them, and all those things that are kind of uncomfortable. I'm sure Kayla knows all about that better than me.
Greg, I was going to add to that real quick. Speaking of independent living, so in college when I started, initially I didn't have caregivers for a long time, but once I started that whole process, I had at-home caregivers, and then independent living would give me I think 30 something hours a week or so, and so I decided to use that to hire a couple friends to assist would drive me around and stuff, because it got to be too much for my parents could do, my mom could drive me in the morning and stuff, but a lot of times I was very involved with stuff on campus, and I worked for the school paper where I would work a lot of late nights, and so it was much more feasible to have friends who are also on crazy schedules just drive me home than have my parents worry about that. So that is an option too. If you get into independent living, you can hire your own friends or someone so they and then use it for whatever services you need.
Thanks, everyone. Kayla, you might be able to answer this question. As a parent of a high school child with SCA2, which is degenerative, how do you help prepare them in selecting a career?
Yeah, everyone kind of struggles figuring out what the right career path is. I know that a lot of people with disabilities, physical disabilities, they're really good with technology because they rely on assistive technology for their everyday life. Whether you use software like Dragon Naturally Speaking, to other tools to use the computer or other technologies. But so I know a lot of people who have gotten a passion for computer science and coding through their own personal experiences as a person with a disability interacting with the world. also, on the flip side, I've had people utilize their experiences as having a disability to support their passion in things like social work. I just really think that there are a lot of careers out there that even if your disability is going to change from day to day, there's some expertise there that we have that we can utilize that's valuable. Sorry, there's a truck. But yeah, it's a challenge. It's going to be a challenge to figure that out, especially when you have a progressive disability. But I would just start exploring and talking to other people with disabilities who are doing their careers. The Do It program has a lot of mentors. So whether they're, working for the government, maybe in aviation, or maybe they're working in Microsoft, or maybe they're a school teacher, we've got a lot of people who share their stories of like how they found what they were the most passionate about. But it just really depends on the person. But for me, what was most beneficial to me in finding my career path was talking to other people with disabilities. I think that was probably the clearest. It was when it clicked in my head, like, oh, I could do that. And so, yeah, it's just kind of a journey that we all take, and you have to account in what your disability will mean for that job. The Job Accommodation Network, JAN, online, they have a wonderful website with so many resources. You can actually talk to representatives from that organization about different job accommodations and what that could look like. Because there are just so many, and it's, again, in that transition, job accommodations are going to look totally different, and it's going to depend on what company you're at. But oftentimes you can get a lot more creative when you're working on job accommodations. What really is important is, so similar to in college, where we all have to meet the same requirements on the syllabus, it's similar for when you're doing a job. Now, you can alter a job description if it's not essential to the actual job. For example, I was a receptionist. We had to do filing. I couldn't reach some of the files. So what we did is I didn't have to file that section. I just did everything else that I could reach instead. So you can be creative and you can alter things, but you have to talk through, okay, what is an essential requirement for this job? And in the Job Accommodation Network, they have so many examples of accommodations, and you can put in kind of what your limitations are, and you can look in their database, and they have very detailed descriptions. So it's actually really uplifting to go there, because I think what you'll find is that there are things that will allow you to make most jobs work. Obviously, we're not going to be heart surgeons. Well, at least I'm not, because my hands are not usable in that context. But there are just so many avenues that you can take.
And, Kayla, I want to jump in here and say, I jotted down when you were talking earlier, some of the things that we encourage: volunteer, that kind of lets you know maybe some things that you can or can't do. And one of the greatest things that's come out of this pandemic, you got to take the good with the bad, is there are virtual tours of jobs. So you don't have to go there and experience it. You can get online and see some of the jobs that are out there and sort of imagine yourself in that. And like Kayla said, make those sort of accommodations in your head. This is what I would need to do that, and one of the biggest problems in the employment pool, if you will, nowadays, at least here, is we have a lot of young adults who really haven't had a job of any, and it doesn't matter if they're disabled or non-disabled. you know, they've never really worked. So any experience you can get along that line would be helpful. If you can get out there and volunteer, just anything to put on your resume that you will help you. And you know, it isn't, you know, you know, that's one of the things we're trying to do in our state is get youth out there at least seeing jobs, so that, you know, eventually they will go to work. Because I think a lot of able-bodied people have, you know, they get out there and they work at McDonald's, or they work, you know, a part-time job. But the rest of us don't see ourselves in those jobs and don't do that. So, you know, I would encourage, even if it's for 2 months in the summer, you know, try to do something, work somewhere, even if it's a volunteer position.
Thank you, Greg. Another question that came in, and I'll kind of ask this to Kevin and Angela. When you were looking for a college, was the quality of their disability service program part of the reason why you chose the college that you went to?
Yeah, so I think there's like a lot of reasons why I chose the college that I did. So I went to, for undergrad, Gonzaga University, which is in Spokane, Washington. So for those of you not from the Pacific Northwest, it's about like a 5-hour drive on the other side of the state from Seattle. So I was in state, but I definitely like moved away from college, which was a big, you know, thing to deal with as someone with a physical disability. So that being said, I wanted to make sure that the disability support office at Gonzaga would be, I knew I was going to be working with them for 4 years, right? And so I wanted to make sure that I would be able to build a relationship with them, and I knew that they would be, you know, supportive of what my needs were. And honestly, like, I remember being a high school student, doing my college tour, and they just kind of went above and beyond to make sure that not only my tour was welcoming and accessible, but like they reassured me that like, we want you here, we want you to feel welcome, and we want to do what we can to support you. And it wasn't just the disability office, but the whole university. And I, you know, on a practical level, I knew that I would be able to get the accommodations that I needed, just in terms of accessibility on campus. I would say it's a pretty accessible campus. I mean, no place is perfect, obviously. But I knew I would get the accommodations I needed for the dorm and that sort of thing. But I also knew that like as a whole, that I could see myself at that university. So yeah, it was part of the disability office, but also all of these other things that like, could I see myself making friends here and being a part of the community? And then also they offered things that were what I wanted to pursue professionally, which was psychology. And at the time I was on the pre-med track, obviously not anymore. But yeah, so it was a lot of different things of why I chose that university. Definitely the disability office and accessibility. Yeah, hopefully that answered your question.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, for me, I mean, NC State was always my top choice because A, it was really close to me. I mean, I commuted all throughout college, and campus is less than 20 minutes away from me. But also in high school, I did a writer's workshop camp like during the summer there for, I think, 3 years in a row, at least two or three. And I really liked and so, you know, I always knew I wanted to write. I was always attracted to storytelling and media. And so from doing that workshop, I liked their program a lot, and I already had that exposure. And I felt the campus, I mean, well, the campus is huge, and like there are different parts to it. The humanities building was set up really well and was accessible. So between that, and then once I got accepted, I visited the disability services office and was really impressed by them. They were actually the ones, I didn't know about vocational rehab at the time. They were the ones who directed me to them, and extremely grateful for that because they did pay my tuition. Like like Greg said, I know it's very different state to state, and it may have changed since then. I don't know. But I was really fortunate there. And so, yeah, the DSO office was extremely helpful. And even today, I have a friend of mine used to work there when I was a student, and we still keep in touch now. Yeah, that it's definitely a factor. There were a number of factors, and there were other schools I was looking to as backups, but state was always my top choice for those reasons.
Thanks, Kevin. This might go to Angela. I think this is kind of like a backwards answer because I think it's a parent who's asking, but you might be able to give advice from the student side, from the child side. What advice do you have for parents who have a child who is wanting to go away for college? Were your parents freaked out that you wanted to go so far away?
Yes. So I'm an only child as well. So my parents are super overprotective. And I think when you have a disability, that naturally, that protectiveness factor comes in to play, maybe more often than my able-bodied friends and peers. So yeah, I mean, they knew that I wanted independence. I didn't necessarily want to go far away. It just happened to be that the university that I fell in love with, and that would be a perfect fit for me, was 5 hours away. And I was a little nervous, but I also knew that I was prepared in high school. And then so I know Kayla. I actually did the Do It program at the University of Washington that she works for. And so that honestly was super instrumental in giving me confidence to know that, like, hey, like, even though I'm not, going far away, I'm staying at the University of Washington, for a week and pretending to be a college student away from my home, away from my parents. And that gave me the confidence to know that I could do it. And it gave them confidence to know that I could do it. And that I was at a point in my life where they may not be there, but I've been given the tools that I need to be independent and also learn how to ask for help. I think it was harder for them than it was for me. My mom cried the entire way from the drive from Spokane back to Seattle. But if I needed to come home, I could. I came home for holidays, for Thanksgiving, Christmas, summer. Flights are only like an hour and a half if you choose to fly. Or actually, no, like 45 minutes actually. So it's okay. But yeah, I'm not a parent, obviously, but it'll all work out.
Thanks. Here's another one about a wheelchair car. So this question says, I'm in a wheelchair and am at the age to drive. Are there any good tips regarding getting a wheelchair car any of you have? So I think it's about just getting a modified vehicle. I think, Greg, you might have just got one.
Yeah, you have to be evaluated by a certified driver rehabilitation specialist, which is, they call it CDRS for short. And whether that's it's sort of just figuring out what's going to be the best vehicle for you, what type of vehicle they would do, training. It's pretty amazing the types of training. I know I was talking to the one that did mine, and he helped the guy that had no arms drive. So there's all kinds of technology out there that can help. In our state, you certainly have to have a I think Kayla said that in when she was talking. You have to have an employment goal. In some states, I know you have to be within a certain range of that. Like you can't be 6 years out and they do a modification, because what ends up happening is there's probably going to be a second one by the time you actually start working. So it's, most of the services that we have are tied to employment and getting employment.
Yeah, I'll
Okay.
give a quick shout out to DVR. I actually got my car modifications through DVR. And the person who trained me or was evaluating me, that DVR connected me with, even he was like unsure if I'd be able to drive. But he helped me through it, and we worked, and we got an adaptive steering wheel and pedal extensions. And so they just go through and they help you find all these little things. So it's always worth trying and getting evaluated to explore those options. So yeah, just wanted to shout out for the DVR services.
Thank you. We have 15 more minutes for the webinar and a ton of questions, so I'm going to keep going. Can anyone talk about how to plan for or respond to changing needs as disabilities progress? I began college able to transfer myself from my wheelchair, and now I can't, and I also have a portable ventilator. So how to respond to changing needs?
I don't know how well I will be able to answer this. I will say I've had a change in needs in the past couple of years. You know, disease progression is a real thing. And so I just want to validate that that's difficult and that's hard, and I understand that. I don't know if I have a good answer of how to deal with it. So far I've just kind of done the best that I can, but another panelist might be able to answer your specific questions related to that, but I get it.
For me, most of the changes that I've made to adapt to my body's changes has been through like all the times that I've completely failed at something. Like sometimes I don't really notice my body getting weaker until it's like staring me in the face. And I'm like, oh yeah, I used to be able to do this and now I can't. So I know that people with disabilities, we're really good at problem solving, and we do it on a micro scale every day. You know, all these little decisions we have to make. And I also want to validate how you're feeling as well. I guess I get most of my advice from other people with disabilities. So if I'm having an issue, I reach out to, I know a lot of people from camp that I met growing up who have MD, and they'll give me little tips for kind of how to work through things. I also have to reevaluate with my caregiver what support I need. So I really try and pay attention to what my services are, because I get my caregiving through the state. And so sometimes I have to renegotiate with caregivers about what my needs are, because they may not notice that we're struggling more or unable to do something. So yeah, it's just a lot of communication and trial by error. I feel like I don't have like the best answer, but I understand. And it is unfortunate when, you know, things change and you haven't realized it, and then all of a sudden you can't do something. It's very frustrating.
Yeah. Here's another question that has come in. I don't know if maybe Kayla or Greg, you might know the answer. If you get a job making your own money, is it true that you no longer qualify for Medicaid or Social Security benefits? Is regular insurance able to cover your healthcare costs?
Well, the way we always tell folks is you are better off working than not working. And it may be that you can only work part-time and keep the Medicaid. It depends. Some states have Medicaid buy-in programs that you can, you know, you can still maintain that. That is one of the biggest, I don't care what your disability is, that's one of the biggest issues people have is, you know, worrying about their insurance, which is a good, you need to worry about that, your medical insurance. but yes, you might lose your check, but you want to, the biggest thing is you want to maintain that Medicaid or Medicare, depending on where you're at. And, if you can, at first, you have a SSI, SSI and Social Security Disability have incentive programs to get people to work. So they don't penalize you immediately. It's not like you go out there and go to work, and as soon as you go to work, you don't have your check. I try not to say too much about that because it's so confusing. It's so independent. You definitely want to find, talk to your vocational rehabilitation office. They will guide you to some resources for Social Security, and there's work incentive, there's WIPAs. I can't remember what all that means anymore, but they can look at your specific situation and say, hey, you can earn this much before it impacts you. So, definitely reach out. See if you can't find a WIPA in your state that can help you with that. And Voc Rehab usually can point you in that direction.
And I would say the best advice I have in that regard is like connect with other people with disabilities in your state, because they're going to know what the rules are. And like, there's things like Able account, which I have too, which allows you to, because I am on Medicaid, I work full time. I still have to stay at a certain cap, but things like Able accounts allow you to put money away and save without it interfering with your benefits. So there are loopholes like that, but like Greg said, it's very different in each state, and that's just something you have to plug in with people who also know the rules and can help you out there.
I will say, I'm 33 and still struggling to understand this system, and so definitely try and find someone, whether it's DVR. I mean, they do benefits. Well, in my state they do benefits counseling. I think they call it, where they can actually explain SSI a little bit to you, and because there are a lot of different programs. There's SSDI, which is meant for people who have benefits, meant to help them work, but it's still very, very difficult to navigate. In my state, I have the type of insurance for caregiving that allows me to work. I just have to pay a premium every month. And that may be what Kevin was talking about too. But so there are a lot of different options. So it's best to really, it's going to be hard, but don't get discouraged, because these programs are really important. And you absolutely can work and get services.
Hey, Kayla, good point. They're benefits counselors, benefit consultants, you name it, they're there. The scariest thing, at least in our state, is if you go to Social Security, we have, I don't know how many offices in the state, but you about get a different answer each one of those you go to. Benefits consultants, specialists, WIPAs, they're going to know way more about that, and it shouldn't be that way, but that's how it is, because we've had all kinds of misinformation given to people at the local Social Security offices. Those workers are usually there to intake people, get them in the system. They don't know much about work incentives. So yeah, definitely work with those types of folks.
Thank you all for your input. I think we have time for maybe 2 more questions. As a rising high school senior, I am currently planning for college. Should I put more focus on schools that accommodate medical and disability needs, or on schools that support my career and personal interests? So which one is, what's the percentage on that? What do you guys think?
I think it's important to look at both. There's not really going to be an ideal. There's all, like, every university is going to have its issues, like with either, really. But like, for instance, state I mentioned that the humanities building was really accessible. It was more modern, but it's a very large campus. There are plenty of places there on campus that are not anywhere near as accessible. And that was just something I had to work around. But, and then in terms of, but I mean, you absolutely want to find a school that supports your interest and your career that you want to pursue. You don't want to go to school just to get a degree. I mean, and like we talked about earlier, I mean, knowing what you want to do and all that, and or not knowing what you want to do, that's pretty universal, disability or not. And I mean, some people know exactly what they want to do when they go into college, and that's great. But others, it evolves. And but yeah, I mean, you definitely, if you have an idea of what you want to do, it's definitely important to look at that. It's also important to look at what kind of disability accommodations they have. But I wouldn't really give more weight to one or the other. I think you want to find a balance between the two.
Another question that's come in, and I think it's important, it might be TMI, so if you are not comfortable answering the question, don't worry, you don't have to. But I thought I'd ask it anyway, as I think it's an important question to ask. I will be going to the University of Denver this fall, although I will be living at home, and it is likely that my mom will continue to serve as my CNA, at least initially. Do you have any suggestions for getting help with using the restroom while on campus? Anybody want to take a stab?
Oh man, this is absolutely relatable to me. When I, like about 10 years ago, it was one of the it was my biggest need because I could do most things throughout the day, but bathroom was not one of them that I could do on my own. So I absolutely understand. A lot of times people will hire out of their own pocket a fellow student on campus who can help with things like grabbing food and like little things like when you have a break and you're gonna go get something to eat, they can help grab food or they can help you in the restroom. Some people just do personal hiring of an aide, maybe 1 or 2 hours a day. So that can be an option. I know a lot of people that do that, and that's one that I did as well. I just had someone literally meet me, at an accessible restroom once a day, and help me. And it benefited them. They were, college student. I generally advertise to like nursing students, but there are a lot of students looking for work. And so if you're comfortable with that, if that's something you're comfortable with, not necessarily right for everybody, but that could be an option for you. Otherwise, I would have to have a family member come and help me if I was in a pinch. So that's why I always stayed in a college near home for me. So
Thanks, Kayla, for sharing that.
Just for guys, yeah, I mean, I don't mind sharing this, but I use an external catheter, so that is an option. And I mean, I've trained friends how to empty it and stuff, but I like it because that way I don't have to worry about, because it's very hard to transfer for me during the day. Because I have my Jaker robotic arm and then tray and everything, so that just works better for me. But yeah, you just kind of have to see what works for you the best.
Thank you, Kevin, for sharing. I think we have time for one more question before we close out. Let's see, let me look through. Angela, being a PhD student, what is the experience like now as a student with a disability versus when you were in undergrad?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's very different, as I'm sure Kayla can attest to as well. Yeah, it's very different. Much higher workload. I as an undergrad, it was more of you go to college for the experience, and you have a lot more free time to hang out with friends, or your time is your own. PhD is complete opposite. It's more of a professional degree, and with most PhD programs, there's a research component. So like, for example, like when you apply to a school and a program, but you're really applying to a professor to work in their lab and do research, and, you know, publish posters and articles and in journals, stuff like that. So it's a lot. It's difficult, not gonna lie. It's really overwhelming. My program is a 5 to 6 year program, which I think is pretty standard for most PhD programs. It's a clinical psych program, so there's practicum. And so we, you know, I have clients that I'll be seeing soon to get that clinical work in. Yeah, I mean, I don't know how much this can answer your question, but it's very different. You have to have a really strong work ethic and really know what you want. It's also, you have to think about expenses. My program, a lot of PhD programs are fully funded because like you're working and producing all of this research for the school and the program and professor. Mine particularly is not, which is not all that common. So it's a lot of out-of-pocket expense, which I have through a lot of loans, which, you know, you have to think about. And then in terms of accommodations for a disability, I think it's kind of the same as undergrad. You get that through the university. And I haven't really had much of an issue with that. I will say the university I'm at currently, Seattle Pacific, is not the most accessible university in the world. So that's been interesting. But I've also been doing school remotely due to the pandemic. So yeah, it's a lot. If you're thinking about pursuing it, that's amazing. But yeah, it's an experience.
Kayla, do you have anything to add before we conclude the Q&A?
Yeah,
Kayla, I don't know if you have any more to add to that as a fellow doctorate.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I'm not doing a PhD, but I'm doing a different type of doctorate. So there are many different types. PhDs are, yeah, very research-based. I'm doing a little bit of research in mine, but yeah, it's a little bit different. It's a lot more time-consuming. There are some programs where you can work full-time and be fine, like mine. And then there are some where you have to just do your program. And so, but yeah, it's totally something that if you're interested in, consider. I would find some students to talk to who are in that program, but I like it. I like school, but it's definitely harder. So, but it's totally possible to do. Yeah, absolutely, it's worth it.
I'll also add, like, yeah, a lot of programs, you can have a job, a lot of them you can't. So I'm a full-time student, but I also have a part-time job on the side, but it's getting to the point in my program where things are ramping up more. And so my advisor had to have a conversation with me saying, okay, like, I know you have your part-time job that you love and, you know, you want an income, but like, are you able to manage that, just because your expectations are going to be ramping up quite a bit? So something to think about, consider.
Thank you both. I just wanted to share this quick comment to the four of you before I conclude the presentation. It just says, thank you all for your insight and perspective. I've been a little overwhelmed and confused about this process and next step. You helped it make it seem more doable and gave me an outline to follow. So thank you so much to Kayla today and to our panelists, Greg, Kevin, and Angela. We appreciate your time and your expertise and everything you do for the neuromuscular community. So thank you very much for answering all those questions today, and Kayla for your content today. I know there was more questions in the chat. So if you have any more questions that you may not have gotten answered today, send them to MDA Engage at mdausa.org, and we'll do our best to get them answered for you. We would love to hear your comments about this webinar. If you have a smartphone, open your camera and point it at the QR code on the screen. A web page will pop up with a short survey on today's webinar. If you don't have a smartphone, once the webinar is over, a screen will pop up with the survey as well. Thank you again to our event sponsor, the New Motion Foundation. We would not be able to provide events like this if not for their generous support. So thank you very much. If you are new to MDA through this program and are diagnosed with one of our 43 diseases under MDA's umbrella, or are a loved one of someone who is diagnosed, we encourage you to stay engaged with MDA. You can do this by visiting mda.org/join and completing a short form. This concludes today's MDA Engage webinar, Preparing for the Future, Finding the Best College and Career for You. Thank you very much for attending and have a great rest of your day.